You're listening to the Tuesday Front Page, 94.7 The Pulse, and as I alluded before the break, we're going to discuss refugees, and it's a topic that never goes away. It ebbs and flows from being serious to very serious, and we're probably in a state of very serious for lots of reasons, and a lady who's going to come on and help us work through it, Melanie Macfarlane. She's been on before. Melanie, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Rob. Great to be here.
It's good to be here. Good to have you, I should say. Now, I say it's growing on two fronts. One is that, of course, what's happening in Ukraine is adding to the possibility of international refugees that are constantly coming from all sections. But the other thing at the moment is, after a long period of closed borders, Australia is desperate for staff. We just talked with our previous guest about the need for workers right across so many business sectors in the country, and you sort of sit in the middle of both quarters, I imagine, so you would be a little hectic at the moment.
That's exactly right, Rob. Yes, we are. With borders open, it's not just onshore work now, of course, that we're doing, but we are working with actually a lot of Australian companies in many different sectors who are, including geotechnical engineering, for example, childcare, aged care, who are all wanting to bring people from overseas as well, if possible, to fill the skill shortages they have here.
Melanie, one of the discussions that is regular too now is about wages, the lack of wage growth, and particularly the relatively poor wages in some sectors. Now, a couple of those sectors that you mentioned there, by Australian standards, are quite poor. For someone coming from another country to Australia, would they find those wages to be relative to where they've come from with cost of living and the money per hour they're getting, or is there going to be a major change for them in one way or the other?
It's funny you say that. I saw a contract yesterday for an IT worker, actually, in Chile, who was receiving, for 45 hours per week, he was receiving a salary of about $36,000 per annum. So that gives you a little bit of a comparison, just in a completely different sector to those I've mentioned. So yes, those salaries are still going to be good, but of course the cost of living makes a difference. And for many of the clients that we work with, they are actually in regional areas of Australia where the cost of living is lower. Not all, because it depends if they're very remote and they have to have products and what have you shipped in, well, not shipped in, but brought in from the main cities. But in general, yes, it is a tricky one. I understand, because we don't want exploitation either of migrants or wages stagnating as a result of, let's say, too much immigration. But I definitely feel that there is a balance to be had there.
The reason I ask the question is because we've got pressure from sections in Australia to have wages in some sectors lifted, and there's no hiding from the fact that aged care and childcare are two areas where, by comparison, I think our staff are grossly underpaid for what they do and their expectations. But if people are coming in from overseas and are happy to keep those wages at a low base, it takes the pressure off those that should be working to lift them. Does that cause a bit of a social issue in Australia as well as the migrant issue that you deal with?
Yes, I see exactly what you mean, and I know the Royal Commission has been pushing as well. So I know that I think it's in July this year that those wages need to be looked at in aged care, for example, and childcare, and I fully support that, of course, because yes, it's very important work on both sides of the ends of the spectrum, as it were, of the care sector, for people who work in those sectors to be paid enough. We have international students. One thing I would say is that international students are being able to work full time at the moment, which is all very well and good, but I think that could create some issues in terms of wages. You might be better off, and also I know I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but if you create that feeling that students can just come here and work full time, then they may not actually respect Australia as a study destination as such. But yes, I think two things have to be handled at the same time, because when migrants are sponsored, they have to be paid the same wages that Australians are. So therefore, I think the wages need to go up. You need to see how many Australians will then go into that sector, and then you can have some balance as to what numbers, you have of migrants who can then be sponsored in that sector. So there's quite a few things to look at there that I've just mentioned, actually.
We too tend to think that most of the migrant workforce go into either agriculture or hospitality, but do you actually have a pretty good handle on the breakdown percentage-wise of where migrant workers coming into the country, which industries they'd go into?
Well, that's a really good question, and it makes me think I need to go do even more data research myself. But I would say, for example, international students, as I said, they can come in and work full-time at the moment. They will definitely, a lot of them will go into hospitality. I'd say a good 50%. Or more. And those whose English, of course, those whose English is not so good will go into more basic industries. They'll be doing some cleaning jobs and so on until they get their English to a level where they can work in other sectors. And that's something that we need to look at more for those who are coming in who are very skilled, to be able to use their skills. But obviously if they can speak English. And that's another reason for migrants to go into agriculture also if their English is not so good. Having said that, Pacific workers speak very good English and they work in agriculture. I'd say quite a lot of migrant workers do go into the care sector. So about 50% hospitality and then 40%, then you're looking at around 30%. I am guesstimating here, 30% going into agriculture, and then you've got the care sectors as well. I say good 30%, and I think that's growing actually. But then, of course, you've got all the skilled migrants who, I'm talking more the temporary workers, those who are coming in and getting their permanent residence are going into a lot of skilled sectors like IT, engineering, and so on.
We've heard horror stories about exploitation, particularly in agriculture, where large groups of, say, fruit pickers or vegetable pickers can be contracted out and they're under the auspice of a person or a group of people who probably do treat them poorly. But generally, are the other industries that are more capital city based or large regional town that involve hospitality and the care sectors, are they better maintained as far as making sure that the staff are properly compensated?
Yes, in my experience, certainly. And I mean, I know in agriculture too, there's a lot of farmers who look after their staff really, really well. And of course, those incidences of exploitation, what have you, they're always going to be highlighted. But yes, they do exist. But yes, I would say in the cities and what have you, perhaps there's even more mix amongst those who are Australian residents and citizens already, working with the migrant workers. And so perhaps there's less opportunity, should we say, to exploit in those areas.
The clear difference between someone who's making a conscious decision to come to Australia to work as opposed to a genuine refugee who's in a desperate situation and is desperately needing to find a new home and a new start in life. Is the refugee uptake pressure going to increase rapidly on the back of Ukraine?
Well, yes. I mean, you would think so in a sense because of the government's decision to allow that number to be relatively uncapped for those coming in for Ukraine, which is different to those from Afghanistan. At the time of the crisis there, more recently, there were 3,000 places, I think, set aside for Afghanistani refugees, and more have been set aside for those coming for Ukrainians. Now, whether that's economic, looking at the skill set coming from either country, because the immigration is so economic, I'm not certain. But and actually, it goes to the point that you are making, or the question you're asking, as to what pressure that will put on society, because immigration is economic, and you want to see that people will come in and they'll be able to contribute to the economy and so on and so forth. Well, but by the same token, we have a humanitarian, obligation, exactly, to be able to house, to shelter and protect those coming from countries that are war-torn.
The other thing that always concerns me is when things get into an election mode, the normal function of government sometimes grind to a halt. But I imagine in this particular stage, this area is probably at almost fever pitch in the need for the attention of government agencies. Are you a bit concerned that some of this might get lost in the haze of an election? It's
very interesting, Rob, because yes, this kind of thing often governments will not they want to put to one side often because in an election, and the budget has just been set for immigration numbers. Permanent resident places will remain at 160,000 as before, more places for skilled migration and employer sponsorship. But I actually sense a slight difference this time in the overall tone of what's going on, and also in the need to appease the people in general, because people are seeing the horrors of what's going on in Russia and obviously in the Ukraine, particularly in the Ukraine, and this time, because everything has become so open and transparent during COVID, it can't be brushed under the carpet. It can't be swept under the carpet. And so I think the government actually is needing to pay attention to this at the same time as part of their electoral promotions, as it were.
It's interesting you say that, because it's probably the great work that people like yourself are doing to highlight the issues around refugees. We had the previous conversations we've had with you show that you're very passionate in this area. People are now getting more information, and because human nature is around decency and compassion and empathy, that maybe the stories that we've heard in the past about refugees coming here and being a threat to our society, people are now understanding that we do have an obligation, and these people are genuinely in need of our support, and from what you're saying, the government are feeling that tone within the community and therefore reacting differently around their policy making.
That's right. I really have a strong sense of that, Rob. And yes, there are a lot of advocates in this space right now, and you just can't avoid it, actually. And I would like to think that as a result of the pandemic and everything that everyone has been through, a lot of people have been through hardship where they may not have ordinarily suffered that so much. I mean, it's not nice for people to suffer, but there's no doubt it does make you a bit more compassionate and empathetic towards others.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Just in my general social conversations, there's still the old-fashioned hardliners, but I think generally speaking, people are now more informed, more understanding, and thinking, hang on a minute, we can help here, and we have a need for more people to be here because of the jobs crisis has been well documented around. So I sense the groundswell of support in Australia is much greater now than it was certainly 5 to 10 years ago.
Yes, I really sense that as well. It's just, you can't get away from the fact that there are these skill shortages, that there are here. There is a recognition now that that Australia is a land of migrants who contribute so much to the economy. And without them, we can't get all of the things done that we need to get done and move forward, actually, out of this pandemic and out of this crisis that we've been in.
We're speaking to Melanie Macfarlane about situations around refugees. Melanie, big focus at the moment is on Ukraine for obvious reasons, but there is other places in the world that are constantly under pressure, and people are constantly looking for change and coming to Australia. Where are perhaps some of the forgotten areas where the actions of a particular government or the climate at the time is putting pressure on the refugee situation?
Well, I mean, I would say Afghanistan, that's an ongoing issue for sure. And there were relatively few places in the grand scheme of things given to Afghanis, and the budget hasn't changed that much. And so I would definitely say that that's an area that's important to look at. I would say even countries like Venezuela that have been going through great problems recently, it's been very difficult to bring over students from there because of the economic issues and the fear that a student might then apply for a refugee visa. But these are all countries to take note of during this time. Even Lebanon has been going through its own crises. It's a very tricky one, because as soon as you start pinpointing certain countries and then you want to help to bring students from there, you have to be careful, because as I said, if Home Affairs gets wind of the fact that they may apply for a refugee visa rather than a student visa when they're here in Australia, then you have to be very careful around that. But each case has to be looked at under its own merits anyway.
people like you who work around government policy obviously have an eye on budget time. We've had one delivered. It's been well documented. It's an odd timing because of an election, but has there been enough attention in the budget to the area of your expertise?
Well, I would say that the attention, it doesn't surprise me that the number of partner visas, for example, has been halved once again. It was bumped up for the last 2 years because of the lack of people being able to come in from overseas. There's more numbers now for skilled migration and for employer sponsorship. Those have been taken from partner visas. For humanitarian visas, I would say perhaps because of the Ukraine, there's more focus in that area, which is a good thing. I would still say there's a bit of an electoral piece here in the sense that given there's a massive skill shortage, we could probably do with actually raising the overall level from 160,000 because it was sitting at about 190,000 previously, about a year or two before COVID. Perhaps the government could look at that, and perhaps they will do in the next year or so. So I think that's something to definitely look at in the future.
Another thing that's intrigued me is when you talk about skilled migration, and when we get media reports back from places like Afghanistan and Myanmar in particular that are under a great deal of pressure at the moment around change of government policy to the people, it's hard to imagine that out of that seemingly rubble of a society that you can pull out skilled workers that can be fitters or carpenters or whatever the case may be that are ready to come and ready to start on the job. But is it really like that there are definitely highly skilled potential new Australians sitting waiting to come to our shores?
Yes, actually, Rob, there are. And, the most important thing is, in immigration statistics, Home Affairs statistics, if you wade through the website, you'll find that refugees are actually the best migrants of all because they work so hard, they're so motivated, they want to give back to their families and indeed to the country that has welcomed them. So if they don't have a skill when they arrive, they're certainly going to learn one. But yes, many of them do have skill sets, actually, that they will bring with them. And whether that's in the trades, whether that's in IT or in other areas. So most definitely, there's incredible contribution. And the attitude is just so important. As an employer myself, I love employing someone with a good attitude. It makes a huge difference. Yeah,
it does indeed. Just on that particular subject then, is the screening procedure either at Home Affairs or the Department of Immigration practical enough for us to get enough of the right people here quickly enough for two reasons? One, to make us a better place, but also to relieve the humanitarian pressure that these people are constantly under.
I'll give you a very short answer to that. No, it's not. It's not practical enough. It needs to be made more efficient, and it needs to be faster. And if you had a system overseas that was more efficient and can bring people here more quickly, then you wouldn't have people considering getting on boats and all the rest of it. So definitely that system absolutely 100% needs to be improved.
I don't want to put you on the spot here because you might get into trouble, but is that because the system isn't set up properly, or because is that a little bit of government intervention to deliberately slow the system down?
Well, yes. There's always bureaucracy. You deal with bureaucracy all the time. That's just government, isn't it? So I would say that doesn't help. But who knows? Perhaps there is there is some incentive below that to slow things down. If you want to slow things down in government, you can do so very easily. It doesn't take a lot. So yes, I would say a bit of both, definitely.
A bit of both. Melanie, just paint a picture from where you sit. I know you're busier than you've been for a while, but do you constantly believe things are improving in this area, or you spend a fair bit of your time bashing your head against the wall?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate, obviously, in this space, and running my own business myself, I always see room for more efficiency. We're ourselves as a business a work in progress. We always want to improve, and I always want government to improve and the Department of Home Affairs and so on. So it would be great if we could have visas processed more quickly, for example, and if we could bring in more trained case officers to be able to look at visas and not have the number of refusals, for example, that we're seeing in student visas coming from overseas. So, yes, hopefully that gives you an answer.
It does. And one last question around the people that have been in detention for up to 9 years now. The Australian Open and Novak Djokovic brought some attention to it. We've now had the government releasing 450, admittedly not in one hit, in 3 hits over 3 years to New Zealand, which seems, a silly thing that we're still going down that path. But that still means there's a lot of people in detention that shouldn't be after 9 years. Is that just going to continue to meander on and get us nowhere?
I just hope that changes, Rob. I mean, you would have hoped that Djokovic staying in the same hotel as some of those refugees in detention there, who couldn't even open their windows to get any fresh air, and still can't. You really hope that has to change. I mean, surely there has to. It just cannot continue. It is inhumane, and it just has to change. I think an immediate change could be made just to let them all be able to integrate into Australian society, get on with their lives, and for us to, finalise this dreadful side of inhumanity that we've seen for too long now.
Melanie, it's sort of a bittersweet conversation with you, and I appreciate your time again, and it's the same. You give us some hope that you're working hard to make a difference. We know that when this thing's done right, we attract wonderful people to our country who really add to our society, our workforce, our way of life. But also you continue to paint a slightly sad picture at the back of it. But keep up the good work. We love what you do, and I really appreciate the time you spend with us, enlightening us a little bit more about the reality of this subject.
Thank you very much, Rob. I really appreciate being on and being able to talk through this. In the end, it may be a bit sad, but I think there's so much hope for the future.
I like that. A good way to finish. Thank you. Until next time, we'll chat to you very soon. Appreciate your time again.